at Shamshabad. What a beautiful initiative. Now moving on to the last panel discussion of today, transforming India into entrepreneurial capital. And I'd like to invite on stage our panelists, Mr. Ruchir Lahoty, Managing Partner, Mega Digital Capital, Mr. Ayish Goyal, Co-founder and CEO, Urban Ladder, Ms. Sushma Kaushik, Partner, Avishkar Capital, Mr. Sushantro Mitra, Founder and CEO, Lead Angels, and the moderator for this session, Ivan Mehta, Senior Journalist, TechCrunch.
Hello and good evening to everyone. Are we good to start?
Sure, just a small correction before we start. It's Mega Delta Capital, not digital.
I think we should start because otherwise it will. So we are talking about Indian startup ecosystem. Indian government wants to build a 5 trillion economy by 2025. Our country is the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world. I want to ask you, what are you guys doing to contribute to this startup ecosystem as founders, as investors? Sushma, we can start with you.
Thanks so much. Firstly, thank you for having me here today. It's really it's inspiring to see the kind of startup ecosystem in this city, and we are just a small spoke in all of this. So Avishkar Capital is an investor. We invest in impact assets, and what we see is something very, very promising for the coming decade. We are very excited about the kind of opportunities that we are seeing in the startup space. There is great quality talent that's coming into the country. They're disrupting status quo. We are seeing a lot of enterprising models that are being worked on. And more importantly, there is flow of capital. And when all these come together, we can see significant disruptions in this whole ecosystem.
Ruchir?
Thank you. So we are slightly later staged as well. We invest in Series Bs and Cs across 3 verticals: consumer, healthcare, and tech. And again, I completely would endorse the view that my co-panelist has here. We are seeing the kind of opportunities that I've been investing for now 16, 17 odd years in the Indian private equity space. The things that we could not even think of even 5, 6 years back, be it in enterprise tech, healthcare tech, even consumer, the innovation that we are seeing is unprecedented. I think it's now backed with the right capital as well as the right market too. I think as we go towards our journey of a per capita GDP that inches towards $3,000 and $4,000, a lot of these markets will become meaningful. Enterprises also will be willing to spend. The usual grievance has been that B2B India does not yield as much money, but even that is changing and transforming. We have seen some of the stories of entrepreneurs who presented on this platform as well. So truly excited to back the India growth story, which in our view is completely led by the innovation that is happening, whether through tech or IP creation, but that innovation-led journey is what excites us. And coming to this forum, as I saw a bunch of young, exciting companies in the exhibition area as well, it's very interesting. It's very fascinating for myself as an investor, because a lot of these would probably be the prospective list on my, would be perspectives on my list. So yeah, exciting times.
Sushantro.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us here. And I think I've watched being the oldest I've watched the ecosystem over the last 25 years, and obviously it has matured tremendously over this period. So I work for Lead Angels. We are angel network which invests in early stage companies. But angel investors in general here, when we serve angel investors, we are the link between the entrepreneur and the institutional rounds of the VCs and so on and so forth. So we have to be very careful, the entrepreneurs that we invest into, because if they don't do well, our investors will not be happy about it. And then fewer and fewer of those will then get funded by VCs and so on. So our role is really evaluating startups. This is what we do 24/7. Until now, I think just want to share that 83% of companies invested by lead angels have survived, and which is a fairly good number. And more than that, our adjusted IRR is about 32%. So it's good for entrepreneurs as well as for investors to look at lead angels as a platform. I think the contribution of angel investors in general is often overlooked. And of course, entrepreneurs are the prime movers of this, the contributor, because angel investing is the other side of entrepreneurship, because we take the highest amount of risk and hopefully the returns.
Ashish.
Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks, TiE, for having me over. And I'm just going to take off from where the previous speaker left off. So I run Urban Ladder. I founded Urban Ladder about 10 years back, continue to run the business as the CEO on behalf of the Reliance Group. And outside of that, I do angel investments in a personal capacity, sometimes along with a bunch of friends. And I think if I were to just answer the question very directly, one, as somebody running a business, I think one thing we can absolutely do for other startups, young startups coming up, is to be, one of their early customers and provide that opportunity for them to, work with us as sometimes their design partner, sometimes their early customer. So that's one thing, and we do that with a lot of young companies on the technology side, on the product development side, and so on. And that's, a lot of times that ends up obviously being very good for us, but for those companies as well. The second hat I have on is as an angel investor, and I think it's super important in my view for entrepreneurs who have gone through that journey to play a very specific kind of role as angel investors. There are two specific things which I personally believe in. One is to be a voice of sanity, and second is to be a voice of positivity in the journey of other entrepreneurs. And both these words are important. Just to explain what sanity means, businesses and startups go through cycles, ups and downs, goods and bads. Reminding the entrepreneur that, is too much exuberance a good thing, and is too much, sort of, let's just call it, depressive behavior a good thing. Neither are a good thing, and neither are probably right also. And you just need to, stick to the knitting and keep powering along. At the same time, I think it's important, startup journeys can be tough and challenging. As an angel investor, I'm actually, pretty okay that, there will be some instances where I'll lose my money. I'm taking an equity risk, and I think I need to be honest and decent about it. And I would personally never, frankly, mess with the happiness of an entrepreneur just because the business went down in spite of an entrepreneur's best efforts. And I think bringing that voice of positivity and sanity to entrepreneur's life is something I personally feel is very important, that anybody who can give back in that way should do that.
Since we are talking about making Indian entrepreneurship capital, we have to talk about challenges of running a startup, starting a company, and that lot is dependent on the policy by the government. There are some old policies which are still in effect. There are some new policies like the data protection bill it is coming up. So what do you think are opportunities and challenges in terms of running a company in India? What, do you think there is too much policy? Do you think there is less policy?
Yeah, I don't run a institutional capital provider, so it's a little easier for me to take a clear view of it. I think there are two broad themes where I don't think it's a matter of too less policy or too little policy. I think there is need for clear, unambiguous policy stand on these two topics. One of course being the whole point around taxation. What do you tax, at what point, at what rate, in all kinds of, early stage investment world. I think that while the government has obviously made a lot of forward movement on clarifying the stand on that topic, but I think a lot more needs to be done. So that's first. Second, I think the flow of capital. Flow of capital into early stage startups, whether capital moving from India overseas or moving from overseas into India, into companies where the origin story is in India. I think it's important, and we are seeing a lot of instances of either sometimes the company struggling or between the company and the investors coming on board having to find complex workarounds where the policy is not clear. I think at least I would love for the government to take a clear step back view and sort of clarify the whole sort of can somebody invest in a safe note overseas or not? If it's an Indian origin company where they've incorporated overseas, businesses outside, what's round tripping, what's not. I think it's just too much confusion, and it's just I feel it's a time bomb waiting to blow up. So I hope that the government clarifies its gives us a comprehensive policy roadmap on these two topics: taxation in early stages and capital flows.
I guess we usually come in much later in Series Bs and Cs and help companies grow. But when we do our diligences, when we at our entry point, and we typically get a Big Four to advise us, guide us, there is still a lot of compliances that even the Big Fours know needs to be checked, are not relevant in the new context. And you would always have a CS, which would, CS is a condition subsequent of some 10, 15 items where you need to take the local authority approval on, say, something related to the office, something related to the institution, or some small compliances. So there is the government has been working at it. It's a slow process given that we are a federal system. But I guess a lot more of it can happen if both the levels of government, the central and the states, are driven to make it simpler for entrepreneurs. The kind of complexities that we see in the Indian context, in HR, in supply chain, vendor financing, vendor management, is mind-boggling versus some of the other developed economies. And I think a lot of it can become simpler by just focusing on what the larger agenda is. Not to catch the 10% crooks, but to enable 90% ones who are trying to build a legit large-scale business.
Just to add a little perspective here, we invest early in companies. And while India is recognized for its ease of doing business, our rankings are improving. But it is still very challenging for early stage companies and startups, especially under the new GST regime, where they are still running around trying to figure how to do things. The many compliance that he's mentioning, Shops and Establishment Act, just meeting those compliance requirements becomes a very tedious process and kind of distracts entrepreneurs from their regular operations. And if that is not easy, if the founder for whatever reason wants to shut shop, winding down process is a very, very long and cumbersome activity in our country. And some of these, if is streamlined, can be a lot more beneficial for all the stakeholders.
Yeah, so one of the industries in India which did very, very well is the software services industry. And a lot of people say that the software industry did well in India because the government really didn't understand what software was. And that has been the success story of the other part of the success of the software industry was that they had a very strong association, which is of course NASSCOM. And the NASSCOM played a crucial role in lobbying for of early stage companies and too many regulations and confusing regulations. We have a SEBI registered angel fund, and most of the time we are struggling with what you're talking about, what is eligible, what is not eligible, and so on and so forth. Even though I must say that SEBI regulations for angel funds are fairly user-friendly compared to some of the other GSTs and other things. But I think the need perhaps, and probably TiE could play a role there, is to, educate or lobby for the startup community in India, which I think NASSCOM has done a very good job, and maybe TiE, as partners of TiE, we should try and work on that.
I want to ask you all about funding. Like, we've heard the phrase funding winter a lot of times. Funding has shrunk. Like, in the last quarter, I think there was a drop of 80% year on year. A lot of unicorns are not unicorns anymore because of value correction. Like, but still, startups are happening. Like, new startups are coming up. If people are looking to raise money, as investor, what is your advice to them?
So I think they say that the funding downturn is a perfect time for starting a business, may not necessarily be for funding it. I think there is still, if we look at the angel investment cycle, there is still, there are a lot of new people who are joining the angel investment community, and therefore the flow of capital to the angel networks and the angel funds has gone down, but not perhaps of the same extent as people beyond that level. Even a lot of funds have raised money in 2021 and they are investing. Yes, they're taking longer to make their decisions. So when you're looking at raising money, what would otherwise have taken 3 to 6 months will probably take 6 to 9 months. That is one part. And two, every downturn has an up cycle. We saw that in 2008. We saw that subsequently. And these are like the startup funding industry, somewhat like stock markets. It does go up and go down. The smart people will, conserve capital now, acquire companies cheap, and raise them just the minimum amount of money to go over the hump. That would be my advice to them.
Ashish?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a little difficult to read where the macro is going, but I mean, a few thoughts. One, I think our, Indian regulatory bodies have, the central bank and so on, have, in my view, been pretty damn smart about how they've played the last year and a half. In spite of, so much monetary inflation and so on, right? They've kept inflation kind of, in zone bound and not get things overheated. The second is, from a geopolitical standpoint, with a little bit of the anti-China sentiment, with Russia coming under a cloud and so on, certainly India has been and continues to be a beneficiary. I'm hoping that, between these two positive things, as India, we are able to kind of not get hit as badly as some of the other countries are getting hit. So let's just say that, we may end up, the next year may end up being even keel for India at best. I think from a early stage and mid stage funding, obviously a lot of people are sitting on a lot of money, right? So it's not as if people don't have dry powder, but everybody obviously will turn around and say, do I want to catch a falling knife, or should I just wait for things to settle? And what that does is it just raises the bar for, last year if somebody walked in the room, everybody knew that, if this guy or lady walks out of the room, they will find some other suitors. So, you better write the check right away. Today, they know that's not going to happen, so everybody is happy to wait and watch and sort of allow valuations to settle, allow a little bit of time to pass to see which are the stronger companies. So I think, as you said, time is on the side of the capital providers. But I mean, there is enough and more capital available. I mean, I'm sure Ruchir can testify to that. There's a lot of dry powder available. I mean, that is just fact.
That is correct.
Just from a startup, and then I'll pass it on to him. So yes, the last 2 years, there was a lot of funding frenzy that happened, and that kind of inflated valuations. Just to give the number, I think the CAT2 equity AIFs have raised close to 35,000 crores, and so are sitting on a lot of dry powder. funds like us are sitting on dry powder, actively looking to invest. The only thing we are waiting to settle is the expectations on valuations. That has changed. And so there is no funding winter. Now people are being slightly more cautious and careful in deploying capital now.
Ruchir?
Yeah, I guess we always swing to the extremes, right? When the going was great, the Sensex was supposed to touch 1 lakh. When it starts to go down, it's supposed to go down all the way to 30, 40,000. Same thing happens with the way private markets also invest. We went overboard last 2 years. We are just taking a breather right now. Like Ashish and Sushma mentioned, we have a lot of dry powder waiting. I think what is also very important is what Ashish alluded to, what should the founders be doing at this point of time? And I think Sushanta also mentioned that. Clearly, deal times are going to be longer. So instead of saying, oh, why are not funds committing, what can I do to look at my P&L, to build newer revenue streams, optimize on costs, to extend that runway a little bit more so that even if we all don't know, even if investing does not return very aggressively next year, you still have opportunities and options to survive through this. I guess, at least I'm hopeful that next year would be a great year to invest across segments, but the geopolitics of it, the macros of it, there's so many uncertainties you wouldn't want to build your business about to be completely dependent upon raising the next large round. Can you do convertibles that can take you to that next milestone, extend your runway, so that when things turn around, you are there and around to raise that large round and optimize probably on valuation the next time around, not this time around. So I think some of these hard calls, and it's not easy. It's not easy to be growing at 50% year on year or 10% month on month and then scale it down to 1%, 2% just to remain in business. But that's the call that a lot of the boards and a lot of founders would need to take. So, till the point they see the same investing coming to even keel or again moving towards the aggressive side. You have to be around to stay and benefit from that.
I think we can probably take one more question, and if there's time, we can take closing comments. I think we were just talking about when we were sitting backstage that team building is another thing that apart from raising capital is very important. How do you decide that, you know, whom to pick? And more importantly, now that we have gone through COVID-19, how do you decide, do you want to build a remote team versus do you want a centralized office? There's a lot of talk about moonlighting, people having multiple jobs. How do you handle that? How do you tackle all those things when hiring people? Do you be upfront about it? Do you tell them later? Ruchir.
Sure. So Ashish would be able to reply much better on this.
By the way, that's a lot of questions. Which one do you want answered? All of them.
I think from an investor's point of view, clearly there are segments within an industry that can do very well with remote working. But at least I'm of the opinion, and maybe I'm a little old school, been working for 20 plus years. I do believe that the benefit of water cooler talking or a chat over coffee that leads to organization, learning, or cross-pollination that happens get lost. Secondly, again, and this is only on remote working is what I'm commenting on because we spoke about that for some time. So a lot of these functional areas where remote working could be completely like in tech, I think remote working can be par for course for most tech profiles in companies, or even in software services companies, it could be a hybrid model with more remote and less in person, physically in that office. But there are certain functions within the organization where you have to be on the field. You have to be in the offices to make sure that the deliverables get achieved. So at least that's my thing on remote working. But I guess the fundamental point I would like to guide most founders on, and that's what I tell all my founders, is if you should hire up and not hire down. You should hire people who have better skills than you in the job profile that you are looking at. Because that is only the time when you as an organization will scale up. Otherwise, you will not be able to take benefit of the scale when the market will make yourselves available. There are great models that you can use in these times to augment on your team, acqui-hires being one, looking at founders who have not really been able to get to the next level because of, say, a funding downturn, market environment not being favorable, to add on to that team, because finally it's not the entrepreneur alone that can deliver it. It is going to be a team of that CXOs in the next level that will deliver. And it's a great time to hire up.
Ayish?
But I'll
Yeah.
come here.
Sure. I'll go for the remote working question first. I think, this is one of those topics which it's really a function of, different people's styles as well as, how different organizations are structured. On one hand, for example, in a business like ours, we've always had remote teams, right? I mean, all our operations, all our sourcing teams are, based wherever the operations and sourcing and retail and so on are located, and that's just the nature of the business. And we've had, incredibly fulfilling, high ownership teams in all the locations. We probably operate about 35, 40 locations, of maybe a little more, different offices across the country and across the world. And I think we are privileged to have very high ownership teams in pretty much most of those locations. And I think I don't say that just about ourselves. We are not special. I think that holds for many, many organizations. There have been large organizations which have been built on, what's always been remote working. That being said, the challenge really is on, what's called the corporate office, because the way corporate offices have got structured is the nature of work and the interdependencies of work have got structured in a way, because that's just the way it has been, that people just feel a lot more productive working in one office. I think for the core corporate office teams to start working remotely, I think there is a significant unlearning and learning that people will need to do. I'm not saying there is anything right or wrong about it. Personally, I'm actually perfectly fine. I mean, I don't think in all the time I've worked, I don't think I've ever had to ask any of my direct reports whether they were in office, not in office, whether they were on chutti or not chutti. Doesn't matter. If people work on their own steam, it's all right. But I can also see why it's an efficiency killer for many people. So I think people will have to find their own. I think for sure, if people have to accept remote working, they will have to change a lot of fundamentals about the way those organizations are working and how those leaders are operating. That change has to start from the top, and it's a significant change. It's not a minor change. Then, as far as hiring is concerned, I mean, I'm just going to talk about two themes. One, I think I would be overweight on hiring for culture. That's one of the themes. A lot of times people ask, how do you build culture in an organization? It's not easy. But it, of course, starts with defining the culture and then hiring for culture. You cannot, at least in my book, you cannot hire somebody who doesn't meet the DNA bar, irrespective of how good they are. Because then you just cannot build an organization DNA if you hire, especially senior people who don't meet who don't sort of fit in with the DNA. So that's point one. Second, in terms of the good news is that the world is full with an incredible number of high quality, high intent, high purpose people. You just need to find, the small set of people with whom, your values, your thought process, what you want to do resonate. And I think, I mean, a lot of times people get impatient that I'm not finding good people. I just think that just means that, you're not looking hard enough. You're not mining your network deep enough. There are lots and lots of good people in this world. We are 7.5 billion people in the world. So I'm sure that's just true.
Shashanto?
Things here, this is about entrepreneurs. Indian entrepreneurs don't usually like mentors, and there's one area where I think we all need to learn that most successful entrepreneurs, one of the key things is that they have an informal network of mentors. I think TiE, Hyderabad, and other chapters of TiE, we have done that, and we hope that in future, so that is about one. Second, I would say is that hiring is very difficult. Most of the time you're wrong, and I completely agree what he said is that should hire for culture. Don't necessarily go by, institutes and so on. See if that person fits to your culture, because most probably then that person, he or she will fit in and grow in that organization. And last is that in times like this, it's a great time to hire. So this is the best time to hire good people, because a lot of companies are downsizing and you will get a lot of good people around. So it's a great time for entrepreneurs to hire.
Sushma?
I get the last one. So very quickly, it's all industry specific. We don't prescribe anything on remote work.